Welcome to another episode of PwC's What's Next in Cyber series from the Cyber and Privacy Innovation Institute at PwC. I'm Neil Dar, PwC's Chief Clients Officer, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We'll be hearing about some real-time insights on the recent cyber attacks. Joining me remotely from their respective homes are Sean Joyce, PwC's Global and US Cybersecurity, Privacy and Forensics Leader, and Dave DeWalt, founder of Momentum Cyber and NightDragon Security and former CEO of FireEye and McAfee. Welcome, Sean and Dave. So let's get started here. So let's talk about an overview of the recent cyber attacks. Sean, let me start with you. We all know this recent cyber attack has been in the headlines for the last few weeks. And if a sophisticated nation state targets an organization, whether it's a cybersecurity firm or a government agency, even the best can be breached. What's the latest that organizations know about this particular attack?
So the first thing, Neil, I want to say to everyone out there is happy holidays and thanks for joining us and wishing everyone a safe and healthy new year. But what everyone needs to know about this incident is it was malware inserted into a software update. It's significant and it's different. All right, it's significant because of the techniques that we used in this specific update and what they did once they got on to the network. And that's where, they did things differently. Typically, malware becomes active immediately. This time, it lay dormant for up to 14 days. Second, it disabled security services. And third, it actually camouflaged its traffic to actually resemble existing traffic in the network. So a very sophisticated attack, widely exposed globally, over 18,000 companies, and I think we're still trying to understand the repercussions. The second big thing is, I think it was a violation of trust. When we talk about software updates, we look at every software update typically has what's called a signed digital certificate. And that is saying, hey, it's an authentic update for you to actually use. And in this case, that's what the adversary was able to do, to actually make it look like an authenticated update. So it really violated the trust between companies and their software vendors.
Thanks, Sean. So Dave, switching gears to you, given the dynamic nature of this ongoing investigation and research, what can we expect in the next few days or even the next few weeks related to this particular issue?
Yeah, sure. Likewise, everybody, happy holidays. I get to say that, don't I? Greetings, everybody. I hope everybody's safe and secure and healthy out there. It's been a crazy 2020, as I know everybody's feeling. And here we are now facing a pretty interesting crisis yet again now in the cyber world, as if we haven't had enough. And as Sean just said, and great to see you, Sean, from the other side of the coast. But wow, here we are. You know, whenever we see a lot of crisis, we start to see an elevated threat environment. And, you know, in this particular case, you know, with the pandemic and the economic crisis and the cultural crisis, climate crisis, about everything that's been going on in 2020, you know, it gave the attackers an opportunity and they took advantage of that. And as Sean very aptly put, you know, this was an incredibly complex attack, number one. It was a highly targeted attack, number two. And I think we're still learning a lot about this complex attack and about the attribution that was associated with this attack. But what could you expect in the next days and weeks? You know, probably two or three things. You know, number one, we're going to learn about more victims, unfortunately. You know, as Sean mentioned, there was initially about over 30,000 customers who had the software product and about 18,000 that actually had the update. But it's widely believed that there was only about 50 actual victims. We'll see if that holds up, but this was a very targeted attack and very specific APT campaign. And we'll probably see a few more victims come out publicly. We'll also learn a little bit more of attribution. There's a lot of belief that we'll have very accurate attribution coming as well. So we'll know a little bit more about the attacker. We'll know a little bit more about the TDP, or the tools and techniques that were used by the attacker. So like any major breach that occurs in any major attack, there'll be lessons learned here. And hopefully those lessons learned can really make us more secure in cyberspace going forward, because this particular attack was very egregious and very complex.
You know, Dave, I think you make a great point there. Like every breach that we've seen over our careers, you know, it develops and changes over the course of weeks, months, and sometimes years. So change is definitely going to be the constant.
Thanks, guys, for that color. So as I hear the tone from both of you and then speaking to others in the industry, this incident feels different than some of the other incidences that we've experienced, call it the last 5 years, 10 years. Is that accurate? Like, how do you guys see this compared to other incidences over the last several years? Maybe Sean, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I guess, Neil, I think it's different because is we've already talked about the sophistication. But the second is, it seems like the primary purpose of this was espionage. So when we look at a lot of incidents, it's not for espionage. Sometimes it's for intellectual property. A lot of criminals do it for profit. This specifically, and you've seen by the number of US government agencies that are part of this breach, that the primary purpose seems to be espionage that was actually conducted by a sophisticated nation state.
Dave, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I can't agree more with Sean in that it was very different. It was very complex, but but similar in a lot of ways to what we've been seeing now for, at least for me, almost 20 years, watching the complexity of these attacks continue to exponentially expand in their complexity. And so here we are yet again with a very complicated, sophisticated actor finding ways in which to breach organizations. But espionage has been around for a long time, and as Sean mentioned, there's crime and there's hacktivism, there's espionage, there's even warfare and terrorism components that we're facing today. I see this almost perfect storm. I always like to say, all this capitalism, all this technology innovation is creating a lot of vulnerabilities. And then when you create obfuscation and anonymity on the internet, and now the complexity of the attackers and the research that goes into the offense, here we are. And so, while this is a very different type of attack, it's, something we've been seeing in the last years, in fact, many years, and we'll probably be seeing it for years to come, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the other thing is, Dave, I want to underscore the amount of work that the US government has to do. You're looking at perhaps years of understanding the impact of this breach, and they've had several, but that's something that I think, hopefully will be a broader message to everyone that we've got to handle this risk differently going forward.
So with that, let's shift to what boards will be discussing with their CISOs and CIOs. And maybe, Sean, let's start with you. How do you see the tactical role that the boards play in a situation like this? So for instance, what sort of questions should the boards be asking CISOs and CIOs?
Well, to start off from a tactical perspective, they're going to be asking, hey, does our company actually run this software? Were we running the compromised version? If we were, did we activate our incident response plan? And what are the steps that we're actually taking? But, Neil, I actually think this is also a great opportunity for boards to take a step back and say, hey, are we handling this risk right at the board level? Do we have the right governance structure? Is this being handled in the audit committee? Or is this a technology and operations committee? Or is this, some other committee? But I would just tell you, this risk is something that the company needs to, and the board with its oversight responsibility, needs to ensure that it's being addressed in almost every place in the company. The second thing is, I think boards need to reevaluate, do they have the right expertise on the board? Do you have people like Dave DeWalt, who really have that background, that understand the risks, that really almost every company now is technology driven. Do you understand how that is really throughout the whole company? So I think it's a great opportunity from a tactical level, but also taking a step back and saying, hey, are we as a board, are we looking at this risk the right way?
Thank you. So Dave, with that point that Sean just made around sitting on a set of different boards across a lot of different industries, if impacted, how can a board play a far more active role in responding to a sophisticated situation like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And, I do sit on a lot of boards, and I've really watched over the last years how much education is happening at the board level right now, how much understanding of the risk in cyber that boards are having. But I always give this piece of advice: it's never enough. We always got to be, pushing ourselves. And as Sean just mentioned, I don't really care which committee is really owning sort of the risk of cyber and managing that risk, whether it's an audit committee, a risk committee, a technology committee, or in some of the boards I'm on, safety and security committees as well. But we need a committee to really take ownership of that risk and manage and monitor that risk and work with the security organization on properly putting controls in place. But to your point, this is a real opportunity now to, elevate the understanding. And I always start with this. I mean, do you know what attackers want from you? So the first thing I do when I talk to boards, I'm always pretending as if I'm the attacker. Do you know what kind of attackers are after you? Is it PCI data, credit card data, debit card data? Is it episodic intelligence that you might have? Like you're launching a vaccine or you're doing research. It's a very global importance to a lot of nation states that might be after that information. Or are you releasing your financials on a particular quarter? There's a timing element and an information element that you can also map to attackers, so you know how to protect yourself and when to protect yourself. So a lot of times companies don't think about, wow, what would this attacker want with me? What would that crime group want? Or what would that nation state want? And I used to always say, you could almost set your watch to some of the espionage we would see when a company would launch a new innovation or a new piece of IP or file a new patent that was groundbreaking. Boom, you would start to see attacks occur. So it's understandable if you understand what the attackers are doing, potentially the risk involved with that, and then it really helps you defend against it as well. And so, boards really need to continue to be educated and put the right personnel on the boards to help, because I think that's important. Almost every board, especially Fortune 500 boards, should now have a cybersecurity expert on the board.
Dave, that's some great points, because as you know, with like the pandemic, we've seen nation states, right, launching attacks at some of the pharmaceuticals that were developing the vaccines, and really understanding what we call the crown jewels, right? And it's not just data, it's also about those critical services. The second thing I really like that you said is that education piece, right? So it's not necessarily that you're a technology expert, but you're on that education journey, I think, as a board, to making sure you're understanding some of those things. So I think great points that you mentioned in there.
If I could comment a little bit more, Sean, I just think about what you just said, which is the pandemic crisis. We're all working from home now. And a lot of companies now have all their employees working like we are at home, and you're only as secure as the devices we're talking on, right? So suddenly we got to protect in a whole new way because our whole network architecture has changed. And when you look at the attackers during this last 9 months, what are they doing? Instead of just sending business emails to you like we used to see spear phishing, they're sending social communications to you because you're at home. And we're watching social spear phishing happening. We're watching router implants occur because it's easy to do.
Well, guys, we're out of time here. Thank you for the practical insights here. Very helpful. So thank you, Dave. Thank you, Sean. And we'll bring this to conclusion. Happy holidays, all.
Dave, great to see you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Neil. Take
Happy
care of
holidays,
yourself.
Guys.
Bye.